All right, thank you, Dr. Uku, and all the presenters and participants. I'll present on the issues of transboundary resource governance, and particularly looking at how we will deal with the threats that cross boundaries. As you may all be aware, and from previous presenters like Dr. Kamau and others, you've seen clearly that the Western Indian Ocean region particularly is connected, is a connected system, and that the threats we're talking about are not localized to Kenya. They cross boundaries. So are our ecosystems, coral reefs, and the seagrasses. They all cross boundaries. They don't respect the borders that we've placed for our countries. And this, I think, is very clear from many studies that have been conducted in the region, including studies that look at fisheries and fishermen. On the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see a study that was done by Innocent and others that show the movement of fishes across countries. And this movement is actually inspired or motivated by resources that cut across all these countries. So that shows the level of connectivity that we have in terms of ecosystems and the services that they offer. And so management of the resources we're talking about will also require a transboundary approach. So even as Kenya talks about marine spatial planning, I think the focus should also be on how countries can cooperate to do a transboundary or take a transboundary approach to management of these resources. Next. Yeah, so there are quite a number of studies and assessments that have been done in the region just to demonstrate the level of connectivity of ecosystems, as well as the level of threats and how the threats cross boundaries. Studies on coral reefs that David has spoken about show that threats to coral reefs extend beyond one country to the other. And the several initiatives in the region that have looked at the status of ecosystems in the region. There are studies like this, reports that the Western Indian Ocean Regional State of Coast Report, the Transboundary Diagnostic Analysis of Land-Based Sources of Pollution and Activities, and recently the study on the proposed Kenya-Tanzania Transboundary Marine Conservation Area. Now, all these reports show us clearly how connected we are, and how the threats that we talk about are also, shared among countries. And therefore, I just want to emphasize the fact that we need to think of a more landscape or seascape approach, even as we talk about managing of these problems within our own country. So activities in one country can negatively affect those of another country. So again, the focus should not just be on what's on our side, but what's happening really across the region. Next. Yes, and also the same studies also show that the drivers that cause these pressures are also similar across countries. So population pressure, poverty, weak governance, low levels of awareness, climate change, economic drivers. All these drivers, cut across many countries, and they're similar in many cases. And so the resultant pressures are also, the same. And therefore, this makes it even more critical that we look at a more, large-scale approach to managing these challenges. So this is important even as we look at our transboundary conservation plans and management of the problems that we're talking about. Next. Yeah, so on management actions that have been taken so far in Kenya and Tanzania, focusing on the transboundary area of Kenya and Tanzania, we see there's quite a number of locally managed marine areas, as you can see from the map on your right. We've got marine protected areas that have been the main form of coral reef and fisheries management in the region, as described earlier by David. And as in the opening remarks by Tuda, he mentioned the transboundary conservation area between Kenya and Tanzania as one of the interventions that we are thinking about taking to be able to manage the problems across the transboundary area. Now, this is an advanced project. Right now, the Wildlife Conservation Society have received grants through the Blue Action Fund, and they're working with WIOMSA to be able to drive this process forward. And of course, the Nairobi Convention and the focal points are also part of it. So our role here will be to map out the activities and the ecosystems across the transboundary marine area, and also to coordinate stakeholder meetings across the two countries. So I'm sure most of you will be involved in this process as we move forward, and we'll be notifying you when stakeholder meetings are set to start. Next. So the lessons that we've learned from our approaches of management of transboundary resources so far, both in Kenya and Tanzania, is that we've seen that there's a problem still with weak enforcement in the transboundary marine area. For example, we still have sporadic dynamite problems on the other side of Tanzania, and sometimes they spill over to Kenya. Those are issues that need to be addressed. There's a poorly integrated national vision. So as a country, even as Kenya, I think we still lack a shared vision on how we should manage our oceans. So you can see this clearly from the number of community projects that are growing in number, which is a good thing. But then usually they're short-term, in terms of objectives. They're supported by different NGOs who often don't, have the same objectives sometimes. And these are issues that we have to address if we are to manage these resources collectively. And this is a problem that we have to deal with across the transboundary marine area. Coordination at different levels is still very poor across both countries, both formal and traditional institutions, and working with governments. We still don't have clearly defined structures on how to work together. And even if they exist on paper, they are hardly followed. So we need to think about, a more coordinated approach on this subject. So on issues of data, data is still a problem. Where there's data, access becomes a problem. And where it's accessed, managers still don't utilize data to make decisions. So as we think of planning at Kenya scale and the transboundary scale, the use of data, as David mentioned before, becomes critical. And I think we need to start thinking of how we can use existing data to make management decisions. And of course, fostering collaboration across transboundary areas will be a problem if we still use different governance regimes to manage our resources. And we also need to see how we can, harmonize our governance regimes. Last and finally, last slide, I think. So in conclusion, looking at the Kenya-Tanzania transboundary as an example, we see that the ecosystems are connected. So that makes us think of a more, connected approach to governance and management of our resources. We've seen that actions and policies in one country can affect the other country. So again, we need to be talking to each other about, how we formulate our policies. It would have been nice to have Tanzanians also participate in this workshop, for example, to start sharing ideas and solutions. We've seen that we share ecosystem services across boundaries, and this is important even as we talk about marine spatial planning, that we need to think about shared resources and how they affect our people across borders. And the MSP framework, therefore, should really have as one of its principles transboundary conservation policy as also one of the principles that we need to think about as we start off our MSP process. And finally, I think the MSP process would be a good framework to implement the transboundary conservation initiative between Kenya and Tanzania, because it will help us consider the diversity of stakeholders. It will provide, us ways of dealing with trade-offs and also dealing with the multiple ecosystem services. So I think an MSP approach is useful to think of how to manage all the pressures that we've talked about. And I think that will be the end of my subject of discussion today. Thank you very much.